So who should be captain in England rugby team going forwards? It's often a topic of debate who should be captain in the current England team. I've just read a book by Sam Walker called The Captain Class. And what I want to do in this video is apply this model to the England rugby team to see, are there any candidates currently in the England team that tick a lot of the factors that Sam and his research has identified as being a top sporting captain? So Sam identifies 7 traits that elite captains all shared from his extensive research across, a multitude of sports. Those traits are listed here. What we're going to do is talk through candidates within the existing England team and see whether they meet those traits. Now, the caveat to this is that some of those traits are difficult to know unless you're kind of working or be part of the behind the scenes in the England team. But some you can actually get from just watching performances and from the material that's put out there. So we'll walk through those. The 5 candidates I've identified, which I think are likely candidates for captain in this England team, are the following. So Owen Farrell obviously has been captain previously. Courtney Lawes, who's the current captain. Maro Itoje, who's often touted as captain and similarly captain of the British and Irish Lions on the last tour. Ellis Genge, who again is part of that leadership, or been told that he's part of that leadership group, and also obviously very successful captain at Leicester. And then Tom Curry, who's also taken on the role and deputised when others have not been available. So those 5 individuals will go through each level and identify whether they meet that trait, and to see who ultimately at the end shares the most traits with elite captains. So the first trait is extreme doggedness and focus in competition. And this is kind of defined as, an extreme way of preparing or focus during a match, or even refusing to leave the field as injured. So looking at all 5 candidates, I would suggest that all 5 perform this way. I don't think there's any way of differentiating them between them. I mean, it's very clear with, say, maybe people like Owen Farrell and Ellis Genge, but actually if you look at the performances of Tom Curry, Maro and Courtney Lawes, all would kind of, they all prepare well. During the match, they're incredibly focused. And I would actually argue that most of them probably are carrying lots of injuries and continue to persevere on. They're not one to come off lightly. So the second trait is around aggressive play that tests the limits of the rules. And this comes across for the players that are more concerned with winning than how they are perceived. And actually, of the 5 candidates, I think the only 2 people that tick this in my mind are Owen Farrell and Ellis Genge. I think examples of this are, Owen Farrell's had a number of examples across his game time. I think particularly in an England shirt a number of seasons ago in the Autumn International against South Africa, when he made that dubious tackle on Andre Esterhausen later on in the game. And that could have, resulted in England winning the game. I think there's been examples of Ellis Genge in the latest series in Australia, whereby there's little niggles on the floor, arms across the throat and things, little things that probably give you those 1% in winning. I would argue that the other 3 candidates, so both Courtney, Maro and Tom, are probably not, in terms of their performance, pushing those, doing unsportsmanlike behaviours. So trait 3 looks at those captains having a low-key, practical and democratic communication style. So not your classic Hollywood movie communication. And to be honest, looking at the 5 candidates, the only person who might tend to go down the sort of more Hollywood, Al Pacino type team talks is probably Owen Farrell. I would argue that the other 4 are probably more likely to be more low key in their communication and discussions. And so, and I think even someone like Ellis Genge, who may be considered someone who's going to be big speaker, I know he's very much about trying to encourage and promote members of the team to speak up and discuss. And that's, his influence on that England squad from the O2 behind the scenes videos is very much around that. So I think the next trait is about people who motivate others with passionate non-verbal displays. Now, the first way of interpreting this is to knock off people who are all about the verbal displays. But actually, on revisiting it, I thought, well, actually, all 5 candidates, even if they're very vocal, for instance, someone like Owen Farrell who's known to be very vocal, equally his actual non-verbal and performance, drives people. And this is because the science behind this suggests that there's a very much a mirroring effect. We see this in protesting and conflict, whereby people actually, there's mirror neurons and people actually mirror that behaviour. So I would actually suggest that all 5 candidates will actually, the way they perform will drive people. Probably that's why they are the likely candidate. The next trait is about strong convictions and the courage to stand apart. Now, again, it's a difficult one to interpret, from a fan's perspective. The people I marked down here were Owen Farrell and Tom Curry, partly because I felt that both Courtney Lawes, Marrow and Ellis have shown both publicly and I expect privately that they are willing to challenge convention. I think both Courtney and Marrow are doing that from a kind of political socio perspective. And I would imagine that would kind of also translate into their rugby. I think they would challenge common ideas and they probably have a standing in the game to do that. I think equally Ellis Genge is doing the same. I think you see from his discussion on podcasts, but also those, again, relate to those O2 videos, he's trying to change the culture with England teams so that when new players come in, that they're not this, they're not getting hazed and they don't have to sort of phase themselves in. They are part of the team and their voice is heard. So I think those 3 individuals would definitely stand up. And my concerns is that both Tom Curry and Owen Farrell may not, as a personality, challenge that conviction for potentially different reasons. And then the penultimate trait is around an ironclad emotional control. Now, again, I think this is probably an easier one to do because we see how they perform in position and how they can control their emotions and how they use their emotions to generate performance. I would suggest that I would be marking down here both Owen Farrell and Ellis Genge in this position. I think we've seen examples of where the emotion has got too much for them, and actually that it's led to penalties or yellow cards or a negative effect on performance of the team. I think both, particularly in the case of Ellis Genge, are working on that and getting much more better at that and channeling it. But I would argue that both Courtney Marrow and Tom Curry don't have quite the same issues in that perspective, yet they are able to channel their emotions, particularly someone like Marrow, in a positive way. So it's not like he loses the emotion, it's just that it doesn't roll over into aggression and therefore impacting it in times of either losing player or giving away penalties. So the last trait is actually a trait that I've switched. So in the book, this comes earlier on. I mean, there isn't really a ranking and an order, but I put this later on because I think this is a very difficult one to score based on this model, just because it is literally by definition behind the scenes. So this is a willingness to do thankless jobs in the shadows. And the idea is that great captains were able to lower themselves in relation to the group or team, i.e. sort of carrying bags, the water boy. And this allowed them to earn that moral authority so they could drive the team through challenging times. And there's great examples in the book of Didier Deschamps, the both French and I think captain of Juventus, who was known for carrying bags and doing all those kind of thankless jobs. And obviously he was then the captain in some very successful teams during the 90s and early 2000s. And I think it's very difficult to judge this, as I say, across our England team. I would suggest that everybody in that of those 5 is able to do that. The only person I might query is Maro Itoje in this space, and it's partly because the book overall identifies that traditionally superstars in teams don't make the best captains. So there's perfect examples probably that you're thinking of now of teams, for instance, Chicago Bulls and Michael Jordan. But actually, when you apply the criteria that Sam Walker applies, typically a superstar doesn't actually make the best captain. And it's probably because those thankless chores don't sort of fall to them just given their status. And Maro, with his kind of profile and his, he's often talked about within a World 15, you could argue that actually those jobs never fall to him, even if he would actually do them. So that's potentially where I'd mark him down, although that might be a little bit of an unfair criticism on a man who, by all means might actually be happy to do those jobs. It's just, I think, by definition of his status, he may not do that. And that equally might apply to a few of the other candidates that we're discussing. So based on this model, there are two candidates that stand out. So both Courtney Lawes and Ellis Genge share 6 of the 7 traits that were considered to be elite captains. And it's worth noting that one of the traits that we marked Ellis Genge down was around the emotional control piece, which I think of all the traits is something that you can improve and develop. And I do actually believe with the more exposure to international rugby, in the experience of that, you get better at being able to control your emotions than you do when you're kind of a new novice player. Perhaps it's also not a fluke that he was the captain of the Premiership winning team in Leicester. So it'll be interesting to see how Leicester perform this year and Bristol. Now, do I think they'll change the England captain from here to the World Cup? No. I think they'll probably stick with Courtney Lawes. But if Lawes happens to get injured, then rather than it falling to Owen Farrell or perhaps even Tom Curry, which it has done over the last few seasons, I would be looking at bringing Ellis Genge and getting him to step up, because that could make the difference going forward. So as I said, this is just my viewpoint on the England captain. It's my subjective thoughts around the model used by Sam Walker. I'm sure there's a lot of debate around that, but I thought it was interesting to apply this model on the England rugby team and see who came out right. So thanks again for watching your videos, and we welcome your comments. We'll be doing more videos around England and rugby in a whole.